But for future growth, it's not just the existing products that need to be developed, that need to be broadened up further, but it's also the challenge of applying the so-called sustainability principles. We understand in Indonesia that despite Indonesia is a developing country which has, if you look at the UN FCCC protocol, for instance, the climate change Kyoto Protocol has different obligations to advanced nations, but we understand that as a large country like us, especially blessed by so rich natural resources, including forestry, we have the obligation to sustain and to implement sustainability principles in our development. So what happened is not just we try to expand and increase and grow the sectors, the industries, but we want to see that in a more sustainable way. That is why we now develop many of our own sustainable standards and certifications, which in due course would be done at the world best practice. That would bring Indonesia's position and reposition in a more strategic circumstances vis-a-vis the challenging global economy, as well as the increased importance of East Asian economy. Coincidentally, this year, Indonesia is also the chair of ASEAN, and during which Indonesia would like to see that the ASEAN's contribution to the global economy would increase with the increase of the importance of the economy of this region to the world. So we would like to see many of the new initiatives, including, for the first time, the inclusion of the United States and Russia in the East Asia meeting summit that will take place in Indonesia later in November this year. So we would see and ensure that this global dynamic, as a cost of the global financial crisis, would be capitalized in such a way that it would provide a much more mid and long-term and permanent basis for the greater importance of ASEAN, of East Asia, and of course, where Indonesia is very much key in that undertaking. Now, the second point I would like to touch this morning is the strategy to accelerate the Indonesian development as now being sharpened by the cabinet. I think the sustainability of Indonesian social and political condition, as much as prioritizing reform or reformasi agenda, is no longer a big news. However, we still think nobody should take that for granted, because despite Indonesia's now achieve the GDP per capita income of 3,000 US dollar, but still there are many theories that say that to achieve a real sustainable democracy and sustainable reform, you would need at least a minimum capita of 5,000 US dollars per year. So it is very clear, while we are developing and growing fast, but we still need to improve and mature our democracy and prioritize our reformasi agenda to bring the economic and development benefit and accountability closer to the political reforms and the political accountability. And for that matter, the government now is finalizing the so-called the plan to accelerate and enhance the economic growth that should be launched in the next couple of months, where we would like to focus on basically 6 corridors of economy in Indonesia. We have one corridor in the eastern part of Sumatra, and then the other corridor at the northern part of Java, and then another corridor connecting Bali and Nusa Tenggara, and one corridor for Kalimantan, and one corridor for Sulawesi and North Moluccas, and last one, the corridor of Moluccas and Papua. Basically, the idea and the rationale of developing this type of approach is that Indonesia is so huge in terms of geographical size, it is not possible to boost the whole country in terms of allocating budget, in terms of mobilizing resources, in terms of attracting investment, promoting public-private partnership in these whole areas. So we have to prioritize. We have to focus. So we are focusing on these 6 corridors. At the same time, it doesn't mean that we would not give our attention and priority to the existing challenges of keep on improving the investment and business climate, of keep on improving the provision and service quality of infrastructure development, the challenges that need to address the issue of interconnectivity of intra-island, and then inter-island, and the whole countries in general, which still very much cause problems of shortages of supply as well as price increase. So basically, the strategy is that we are going to prioritize in selective corridors, we call it, to connect the dots of centers of growth between major cities, between major center of industries, by improving the provision of infrastructure, by allocating more budget in the specific areas, and at the same time attracting more investment and public-private partnership. Now let me talk briefly about the third point, the prospect of Indonesia-Australia economic relations, which should include the commencement, I hope very soon, negotiation of Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Well, basically, the agreement itself, as well as the overall economic relations, have to be able to produce the win-win formula for both sides. And for that matter, from the Indonesian perspective, that agreement, as well as future economic relations, would have to fit in with the mid and long-term strategy to increase the value added and processing industries that I mentioned earlier. Because I think the economic cooperation is very key and central in the overall partnership agreement. Some of you might still remember how Indonesia, we had difficulty to convince the domestic political constituents last year on the issue of ASEAN-China FTA. So we are sure that without serious considerations and better understanding how to approach this partnership agreement, we might revisit the same challenge again. Having said that, I think Indonesia and Australia's circumstances are much better to address and provide the opportunities than with other countries. And I think this is the opportunity for both countries, how to really strike the balance as well as coming up with good, solid understanding how both sides can have a win-win situation while at the same time promoting each other's or respective interests. And for that to be achieved, of course, it is very key to maintain engagement of the multi-stakeholders. We have, at the government's level, to include and engage the business communities in every step of the negotiations, because those are the people that should be given the opportunities to provide inputs and suggestions to the officials in conducting the negotiations. But in addition to the business stakeholders, I think it is also important to acknowledge the increased and strategic importance of relations in education and in exchange of skilled workers, something that I think we need also to increase the possibilities and opportunities in this field. There are many Australians that would like to develop and seek their career in Indonesia. At the same time, there are many Indonesians who would like to do so in Australia. Two more quite important, if not very important, notes to end my remarks is that nowadays you might not read or listen to many news about Indonesia. And I think that could be a good thing or not a very good thing. Because in the past, many of the news, of course, related to things happening in Indonesia in the not most positive ways. So, you know, the usual bad news is good news situation. But now I think we have to be very careful, because no news might also mean bad news, because it's less interest in Australia toward Indonesia, and it could be the other way around. No news means that not enough interest. And I think this is something we need to look further how we should be able to turn that around. Last, again, I think at the global level, Indonesia and Australia are both members of the G20, and we are both members of APEC, and of course we are both members of this East Asia Summit. There are many initiatives, there are many ideas and breakthrough being done by Indonesia and Australia together or with other partners at the global, regional, and bilateral level. And this is, again, if we can take that into account, I think that would also enrich the two countries' potential of better economic cooperations. And for that, again, I would like to thank Chris and colleagues from Australia-Indonesia Business Council. It's been a pleasure to work with them for so many years, and I hope we could rely on your support as well as the Indonesian-Australia Business Council support in this coming joint undertaking of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement negotiations. Because really, if we cannot provide the avenue to enhance the existing economic cooperations to a higher level and not utilizing the partnership agreement as the opportunity, I think we might take the unnecessary risk of less attention and less care and understanding about each other. And that's where I think no news is even bad, worse news than bad news is good news. Thank you very much.